Today on Central Illinois on the Record, we're learning more about the case against former 18th District Congressman Aaron Schock. A look at how far prosecutors are willing to go. And Illinois lawmakers leave the Capitol again without agreeing on a budget. A look at when they'll get back to work and what to expect when they do. And the budget impasse is having an impact here in Central Illinois, what the stalemate means for places like District 150's elite program.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Good morning and welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. It's been a rough week for former Illinois 18th District Congressman Aaron Schock. Court documents released highlighted the case prosecutors have against him. A report in the Chicago Tribune called into question Schock's use of a Chevy Tahoe. It says Schock used campaign funds to buy it, then sold it back to the dealer who let Schock continue to drive it at no cost. That's just one of the things revealed in federal court documents. Our Capitol Bureau Chief Matt Porter has more on the case against Schock.
The longer he delays, the more difficult it may be for him.
After 3 grand jury sessions, newly released documents show a bitter fight between the two sides. Documents show Schock calling the prosecution's subpoenas oppressive and unreasonable. The prosecution called Schock deceptive and intentionally delaying proceedings through needless legal motions.
The longer he tries to drag this out, the more legal expenses he's going to have.
While Schock says the cost of going through the almost 2 million documents stretches into 6 figures, the prosecutor said the more than 3-month-long grand jury has already cost taxpayers almost $1 million. Experts say with so much evidence already public about Schock's scandal, the prosecution is unlikely to back down.
I think they're going to continue full speed ahead.
Documents also revealed Schock used a car purchased by the campaign even after he resigned and returned it to the dealer. The car was seen with dealer plates at the Peoria airport in May. Schock's campaign has already spent hundreds of thousands on his legal team for just the grand jury.
The well is going to run dry eventually.
Several of the opinions of the judge have been released in redacted forms this past week. There are also transcriptions of testimony, including from Schock, but those are sealed. Schock resigned back in March. The state held a special primary election in July to determine who would face off for Schock's seat. State Senator Darren LaHood won the Republican nomination. Rob Mellon won the Democratic nod. Now, the two will compete in the general election come September 10th. Later on in the show, we'll hear from Mellon as we get closer to Election Day. And there's a new website designed to help you track money when it comes to political donations. IllinoisSunshine.org lets people find information about political donations from as far back as 1994. Now you can search specific candidates or even political committees. There's also a feature to see the top committees with the most donations. Lawmakers in Springfield not even close to agreeing on a budget, but they did reach a deal on distributing federal money. The Senate passed a bill that would free up about $5 billion in federal funds to help agencies that need it. House Speaker Michael Madigan wanted to amend the Senate bill to include more state money that's tied up in the budget battle. The governor has said he would not sign that bill that includes the release of more state funds.
It's kind of a cold turkey cut because of the deficit. I mean, that's real. So I've been allowed by the board to go out and solicit funds.
That's the head of District 150's elite program after Peoria Public Schools announced budget problems led to cuts to the program. Carl Cannon started it at Trewind School about 4 years ago. He expanded to Harrison School just a year later. Now he's forced to leave Trewind this school year and cut back at Harrison because of costs. The district is allowing him the opportunity to run the program at Lincoln School. Senator Dick Durbin making a stop in Central Illinois. He visited Illinois State University Monday to discuss the relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. Durbin was part of a roundtable. It consisted of local farmers and ag experts. They discussed the possibility of increasing trade with Cuba. But Durbin didn't just talk about Cuba. He also weighed in on the nuclear deal with Iran.
We ought to try this diplomacy with the inspectors and try to find a peaceful way to stop the development of an Iranian nuclear weapon.
Durbin added that military force won't solve the Iranian nuclear problem quickly enough. He feels the current deal is the best way to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of the Iranians. Vice President Joe Biden reportedly considering a run for president. Michelle Kaczynski has more on how the VP is keeping other candidates guessing.
Vice President Joe Biden is calling close supporters and advisors this week, still considering jumping in the race for 2016.
I consider him a friend.
Hillary Clinton says she'll respect whatever decision Biden makes, though her supporters have sent some signals to think twice.
The problem is that Joe Biden is a very good guy and probably has no appeal whatsoever to people under 35.
You think he's going to run?
I can't tell. But I'm worried that if he does and doesn't do well, that it'll be hurtful to him, and we all care about him deeply.
Donald Trump is already treating him as an opponent with a slam.
I think I'd match up great. I'm a job producer. I've had a great record. I haven't been involved in plagiarism.
A reference to Biden's issues back in law school, as well as during his 1988 campaign, accused of using someone else's line in a speech. Here's Jon Stewart recently.
The reason Loose Lips McGee f***ed up his 2008 presidential run is now the reason he's a viable candidate?
However often Biden may make the funny headlines, his decades of experience, nearly 40 years as a well-respected senator, have garnered him plenty of supporters who would like him to go for it. Maybe hit that middle ground of Democrats frustrated with Clinton's email problems, but not liberal enough to back the independent Bernie Sanders. The latest CNN ORC poll of likely Iowa caucus goers places Biden third at 12%. If he doesn't run, Clinton benefits the most.
I do trust Hillary, but I trust Joe more.
But for Biden, this is far more than political. His son Beau, who just died in May, had urged his father to take this chance and run with it. The 72-year-old has had to mull this over in the midst of grieving and working. Now this week away from Washington, of thinking and discussing, could be his deciding factor.
Another vice president is also reportedly considering a presidential bid. Al Gore has been talking to friends and supporters about whether he should join the race. With no end in sight to the budget battle, we turn to our Capitol Bureau Chief to put the fight into perspective. Hear from him next. And the man set to take on Darren LaHood in next month's election goes on the record. Welcome back. We turn our attention again to the Capitol and our Bureau Chief, Matt Porter. Matt, another week passes without a budget, but lawmakers did approve some spending.
Well, that's right, Paul. They did approve a federal funding bill. Now, this will give almost $5 billion to social services programs in the state. Now, all that money, however, is coming from the federal government, not the state, which made the bill a little bit easier to pass for both Republicans and Democrats earlier this week.
Now, you mentioned easier to pass, but there was some concern about a so-called poison pill once that bill made it into the House. What happened there?
Well, that's right, Paul. This bill passed the Senate 57 yes votes, no votes. So we expect this to be an easy breeze through the House. But when they returned this week on Tuesday, they said, no, we're going to add some state spending to the bill, about $500 million to to the bill from the state coffers. That would go to pay for programs like child care and Meals on Wheels. The Republicans said doing this, adding this amendment, was a poison pill and that they couldn't vote for it. And after strong debate on Wednesday, the Democrats removed the amendment and passed the bill without it. Paul?
All right, so everybody's gone from the Capitol. What's next? When does everybody return?
Well, Paul, the Senate is expected to come back for one day next week, presumably to finally pass that federal funding bill. As for the House, they're taking next week off as it is the State Fair week. They will be returning the week after. Now, it is possible if there's something that is needed to be done, the House could return next week. But as of right now, Paul, both sides appear to be the same place as far as it comes for the budget. So it looks like we'll have another short week tomorrow, and then it will go on and on. Paul?
All right, thanks, Matt. That was our Capitol Bureau Chief, Matt Porter, in Springfield. He's the Democrat hoping to win the race for Illinois' 18th congressional district. Up next, we're talking with Rob Mellon about the race and what he'd like to do if elected. And Governor Rauner signs a law that changes the way police serve and protect in Illinois. A look at that new law, that's still ahead on Central Illinois on the Record. All right, welcome back to Central Illinois on the Record. Joining me in studio, Democratic congressional candidate Rob Mellon, obviously running for the 18th district seat against Republican Darren LaHood, and that election is in just a few weeks, but in just a day, you're going to be going back to school.
That's right. I have to go back to school, and I'm really excited about that. As a teacher, sometimes 3 months off seems like something that people would strive toward, but for me, I get bored after a while. I'm not bored this summer, though.
Yeah, you've been
kind of busy.
A little bit busy. So talk about how you've had to, I guess, prepare for an election and to go back to the classroom, because you're not somebody who holds political office all the time.
And that's absolutely true. So what I have to do is I look at my schedule and I pick specific days where I can go and work in the classroom and get prepared for the students, and I continue to do that. So, I just have to prioritize. I certainly don't want to, I want to make sure that I live up to those responsibilities as a teacher.
So how is this going to work then once you're back in the classroom and obviously trying to balance your days at school with your days on the campaign trail?
Right, and that is a challenge, but anytime when I'm in the classroom, the students are my #1 priority, and that's exactly the way it will be. If I have some opportunities in the evening sometime to go to some events, I'll do that, but in the classroom, that's my #1 priority.
As a teacher, you're getting some support from other teachers. You have a teachers union backing you.
Right, and I'm really proud of that endorsement. I'm going to be endorsed by the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and it's because I have a very strong position on education, and a lot of candidates, even in the primary, didn't discuss education very much. And Senator LaHood's record, for example, is pretty weak on education. He's voted against every single education bill, even the most recent education bill, which was a standalone bill that the governor signed into law. He actually didn't support that. And so I think we need someone. It's important for to keep our competitive balance, and our students need to be able to compete on a global scale when they eventually get into the workforce. And investments in education are key to that.
So what is the message then as you now close in on Election Day in September?
My message is pretty simple. I mean, I think if you look at me and Mr. LaHood and you compare us, he comes from privilege and I come from a blue-collar family. That doesn't make him better or me better, but it gives me some perspective. You know, I know what the average person is going through because I've gone through it myself. And then if you look at our specific policy issues, you can go to our websites and check it out. We have some clear differences on that, and I encourage all voters to do that. But finally, I think that we have an establishment candidate, and in my case, I'm the anti-establishment candidate, and I hold that position really proudly as well. I think there's too much money in politics. I think it guides our politicians, and it creates a circumstance where we have a perpetual campaign cycle and the business of the country doesn't get done. And I don't think the majority of the Americans are happy, especially in the district, are happy with the conduct of the Congress, and I think we need something different. And so even Mr. LaHood's staunchest supporters know that voting for Mr. LaHood isn't going to change Washington in any substantive way. I'm not tied to any special interest. I'm not even tied significantly to any party. I'm very independent-minded, and that had some drawbacks in my campaign. But if I were elected, the people can know that my decisions are made completely free of strings and attachments, and that's exactly where I want to be. So if I'm successful on September the 10th, I can do the people's business without those attachments, and I'm ready to do that.
And now if people want to learn more about you and your campaign, how can they do that?
Well, they can go to robmellon.com, and I have all my policy positions. I introduce a jobs plan. I'm the only candidate to do that. I introduce a veterans plan and an education plan. And so if you go to robmellon.com, you can check all of that out. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, and people can follow. I have some videos up now on my website, and if you Mellon for Congress on Facebook, and I've had a lot of connectivity there. And so I'm available on all those mediums, and so if people are interested, they can check me out.
All right, Rob Mellon is the 18th Congressional District Democratic candidate. September 10th is that general election day, so you can check him out on the web. Thank you for joining us. All right, the On the Record panel is up next, and we're tackling the battle, or lack thereof, surrounding the state budget, and a new law puts Illinois on the map when it comes to police reform. We'll explain what it does when we come back. All right, joining me this week to talk all things politics from Peoria Public Radio, News Director Tanya Kuntz. Tanya, thanks for coming on the program again.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here, Paul.
All right, well, when you were here last time, we talked about the lack of a complete state budget. And not much has changed in over a month. What's happened in Springfield and where we're at right now. But this week, a little bit of progress was made in that a bipartisan agreement was reached in the House and the Senate, and it's being sent eventually to the governor that is going to allow the state to spend some federal money. But there was a catch in the House, an issue with what the governor's office called a poison pill. And ultimately, they got over that hurdle, and we're going to have that federal money. But it was an attempt to spend almost $500 million in state money. Again, not a whole lot of progress, but this is where we're at.
I feel like one of probably the biggest challenges right now is that roughly 82% of the state's budget is in place because either law on the books, decree, court order, or other arrangements that exist. And in many ways, school, K through 12, can start and is starting throughout the state. And that can happen because that education portion of the budget was passed a while back. But that remaining part of the budget, that has to do with social services that in many cases our newsroom understands are just being hard stop, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not every child at a daycare center, but a percentage at many daycare centers just don't have the funding that they might have had in place if they're from a low-income family.
It's a big part of the budget, obviously almost a fifth of the budget, but it's a fifth of the budget that maybe doesn't get talked about as much as it could, but we're talking about children, a vulnerable community, senior citizens, a vulnerable community, but who don't necessarily have the loudest voices in the political process.
And as near as I can tell, it is largely children and those with disabilities of some sort. So far, I hate to generalize because I know that there are people in the greater metro region who are hurting because of this, right, without a doubt. But the largest portion that seem to be affected at this moment seem to be children and those with disabilities, as near as we can tell. Keep in mind, you're right, the voices of those that are affected are largely not heard. They're people who are just trying to make it through the day. In some cases, there are probably parents we're talking about here who are working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, right? Before they ever consider childcare. And yeah, those folks aren't real concerned about contacting their legislators, right? Or the governor's office.
Too busy making it to work and
Just
getting the kids out of the door on time.
Yeah, you bet.
A few weeks ago, Senate President Cullerton said, you know, maybe we need to step back and do a reset and look at everything again. But as you pointed out, it's less than a fifth of the budget that's not done.
Right.
They clearly don't need to start from the very beginning because there's a lot of spending in place.
Well, keep in mind the spending that's in place right now, that 82%, as close as we can tell, because we're not in the budget room, right, is funding that was in place in the previous budget year. So that's at the level of last budget year. In fact, in Friday News for Peoria Public Radio, our State House Bureau, Illinois Public Radio, is reporting that right now the state is on track for this fiscal year to spend $2 billion over what's budgeted
from last year.
For what the state would have in revenue to make it this
Yeah.
year, right? And so the budget that Democrats initially proposed was what, $4 billion out of balance,
Right.
and that's why Rauner, the governor, had said that he would not support that, and he would not even talk about that because it was out of balance to begin with. Well, if we continue going down the road we're going, and keep in mind those estimates are based on Senate Democrats' running total of the spending that's going on right now, but that seems to be where things stand right now.
All right, well, and it doesn't seem to be that we're making very much progress at all. So thank you very much for coming in, Tanya Kuntz, the news director at Peoria Public Radio. Still ahead, a new report says the Affordable Care Act appears to be working. We're taking a look at why some would say the law is doing even better than expected. Illinois is now the first state in the nation to pass comprehensive police reform legislation. The law encourages departments to use body cameras, but does not require it. Departments that choose to do so will have to follow state rules. The legislation sets up reporting requirements for officers who make stops or arrests, and also covers racial sensitivity training. Now, the law prohibits the use of chokeholds during arrests. Democratic presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton handing over her personal email server, hoping to put a potential scandal behind her. Clinton has been under fire for months after admitting to using a private email server during her time at the State Department. An intelligence community inspector general told lawmakers at least 5 emails from the server contained classified information. Critics say the server raises concerns about Clinton's trustworthiness. And the rate of Americans without health insurance dropping steeply over the last year. The Obama administration says 9.2% of Americans are uninsured, marking the first time in decades the rate has dropped below 10%. The number reflects a trend since the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, took effect. Since 2013, the number of uninsured Americans has declined by nearly 16 million, according to government figures. That's going to do it for this week's edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can always stay in touch with us using social media. Connect with me and WMBD on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WYZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.